Welcome to LabMinutes.com. In this video, I'll be showing you some of the commands that you might want to consider putting on your router at the beginning of the configuration. Some of these commands are simply disable unused services on the router, while the other might make your console experience a little more pleasant. Depending on the version of your iOS, some of these commands might already be there by default. So the router that we're dealing with here, just to show over, is a 2811 series routers running in iOS 15.1.4 and 4, which is fairly recent. The first command that we're going to do is service nego. This basically enables nego algorithm which will alleviate CPU interrupt that might be caused by small packets like telnet. The next command is no service PAD. Let's just basically disable the PAD service. Next command is no service TCP small server. Also UDP. It does exactly what it said, so it's going to disable some of the TCP or UDP services that runs on the lower ports, such as echo, discard, or daytime, although most newer iOS already has these services to disable. The next command is going to be no service config, which basically stops the router from trying to locate the config file on the network using TFTP. The next command is no CDP run. Although CDP is a very useful command, and for the most part you probably want it to have enabled within your network, there are some exceptions when you might want to have this particular protocol disabled. For example, when you have your router on the internet that's interfacing to the internet router, or if you have a WAN router that might be interfacing with, for example, a service provider router. So it's just to prevent an outside router from discovering your routers, you might want to have this service disabled. So if you show CDP neighbor, you can see it says not enable. The next command is service TCP keep alive in and also out. So what it does is it verifies connections to and from the router and makes sure it stays alive, and it basically removes all the half open or orphaned TCP connections. Next command is service timestamp, and you have an option of debug or log. So for all the log messages, debug messages, you will probably want the timestamp to be accurate, or in certain formats. So you can have it set to, let's do debug. You have an option of, you can do based on uptime or the exact date time. And you can go as granular as millisecond, so that's what we're going to do. And you can pick local time, and that's going to be based on the router local time, and you can tell it to show time zone as well. And we're going to do the exact same options for the log. The next command is service password encryption. This command will encrypt the password on your router, such as enable password or line password, although the encryption is not very strong because you can basically decrypt that using any publicly available tools today. And probably the most protection that it gives you is to basically stop somebody from looking over your shoulder at your screen and kind of make the sense of your password. But anybody who had access to your configuration will basically have no trouble decrypting those passwords. But it's still a nice command to have enable. The next command is service line number. This command will tell you what line number you are accessing the router on, and it usually shows under your banner. The next command is service disable IP fast frag. And this command will disable your fast switching for IP fragment. Then we are going to do service sequence number. And this command will tag your syslog messages with the sequence number. The next command is no service password recovery. Okay, you can see there's a warning popped up that said if you did enable or disable this particular feature, you would no longer be able to recover the password. So if you want to continue, let's say yes. So what it does basically is it prevents you from breaking out into the Raman to do the configuration bypass to basically that's what you usually do for password discovery. So this command prevents you from doing that. The funny thing is when you're trying to look for a password recovery command, it doesn't really show up, but if you type it in full, then it will take it. So next command is enable. We're going to give a router enable password. You can do enable password, but it's not very secure because it's going to basically utilize the weak encryption. So what you want to do is enable secret. And we're just going to give it Cisco. Obviously, you'll give it something more secure than or complex than Cisco. Just going to do Cisco. And if you do a show run pipe include enable, you can see it's fully encrypted. Next command is IPsec. Although most routers should have IPsec enabled by default, you would always want to double check that your router is running IPsec for the performance. Okay, next command, we're going to disable IP source routes, which is enabled by default. There should be no reason why you would want IP source route to be enabled on your router. Next command is no Ip Domain Lookup. This is probably one of the most popular command that people type into their router the first thing. It's basically disable an automatic DNS name resolutions, which sometimes is kind of annoying. And again, given your router doesn't need to do a DNS lookup, you can safely enter that command. Next command is no IP finger. This is just basically disable the finger service of protocol. And again, most of the recent iOS should have this particular protocol disabled already. The next command is IP domain name. And then just basically type in your network domain name. In this case, we're going to do labminutes.com. It is always a good idea to give your router or switch a domain name because it's required to generate things like SSH key. So if you want to enable SSH on your router and the switch, you would need the domain name. Okay, the next command is IP TCP sync wait time, and you have an option of between 5 and 300. By default, it's 30, so we're going to do 10 here. What it does is it will reduce the wait time when you, for example, turn it to something that doesn't really exist. So let's try 2.2.2.2. Oh, let's toast down. I guess we can't really test that since we don't have an IP that we can try it on. So, but it's just going to cut your wait time if you're trying to, for example, turn it to something that doesn't really complete the TCP handshake, and so you don't have to wait the full 30 seconds for that. Okay, the next command is going to be no IP bootp server, and that's just basically disable your bootp services. Okay. The next command is going to be related to the forward protocol command. So if you look, by default, under running config, there's an IP forward protocol ND, and we can disable that. You can see in this Cisco documents right here, it tells you that by default, there's a list of protocols that will get forwarded if the router receives a broadcast message, and you also have the IP helper address turned on the interface the packet is received on. So for the most part, these services can be or these packets you might not want this packet to be forwarded, and usually the only type of packet you will want forwarded under IP helper address is the bootp packet port 6768, and that's just basically a DSCP packets. In this case, we're just going to go through those default protocol and disable all of them. So no IP forward protocol TFTP. Let's see. Okay, UDP, TFTP, domain name for port 53, time for 37, NetBIOS name server, NetBIOS datagram server. We're going to leave the DSCP packets alone, and TACX, and also name services. So if we do show run pipe include forward, you can see no, all of those are disabled. Okay, the next command is going to be no IP HTTP server. Unless you use one of those Cisco tools that require HTTP services to be enabled on the router, you can pretty much disable the HTTP server, as well as the HTTPS, which is a secure server. Okay. On top of that, you can also create an access list that will deny and lock everything, and apply that to HTTP class 10 to see who might be trying to hit your port 80 or port 443 on the router. Okay, the next command is the banner command. And you can see there's different options that you can do. The most common one is probably MOTD or lock-in. So we're gonna do a simple banner lock-in here. That's it. Let's see. We're just gonna use % for our delimiting character, and for our text message, just say it. Disconnect immediately. Okay. And every time somebody tries to log into the router, they will be seeing this particular banner messages. Next, we're going to go under our line console, and it's always a good idea to give all the lines timeout, idle timeout. So here we're going to do 5 minutes, and you can do 0 seconds. So in case, for example, if you have one of those terminal server that has the console cable plugged into the router, and somebody forgot to lock out, the timeout will basically take care of that for you. So it prevents somebody just to come along and plug in a console to the console cable to the console part of the router and gain access to the router without actually having to lock into the router. So it's always a good idea to set the timeout. Next, we're just going to do a simple password of Cisco login. Also, obviously, there's different ways of doing authentication, which we would not be talking about in this video. So we're just going to leave it as the simplest form of authentication, which is the password. And you might also want to do transport output SSH, just to force anybody who tries to connect out of the console to only use SSH. Next, we're going to go under line aux 0. Although this particular line doesn't get used a lot, it's always still a good idea to put timeout, even password, login, and we can also do transport output none. Okay, last but not least, line VTY. You can basically decide how many line of VTY you want to make available for remote access. So here we're just going to pick 0 through 4. Again, for security, you want to configure the idle timeout. We're just going to choose the exact same number, 5 minutes. Password Cisco again. Lock-in. You can do locking synchronous. So every time you get like a message, a lock message, or debug message on your screen, it basically provides a line feed automatically for your prompt. And we can do transport. If you want to force people to using SSH into your router, then you do transport input SSH. So telnet will not be allowed in this configuration. And for transport out, you can also do SSH, and you can also do transport prefer, which is used when you type in the IP or host name directly in the prompt without specifying whether you use telnet or SSH. So if we'll basically use whatever protocol that's specifies prefer here. Now we can exit. Now you can see how quick log message has the sequence number that we enabled earlier. We're going to do a show run to see what we have. So most of the command that we put in for the service, it's actually show up in the config. So keep alive in out, timestamp, password encryption, line number. You can see no service password recovery. Cool. One more command. It's always a good idea to specify what boot image you want the router to boot from, especially if you have multiple images in your flash. So if you do show flash, you can see here we have only one image. But if you have two, you can specify both and pick one that you want the router to use first and the other one as the backup. So here, since we only have one, we're going to do boot system flash and the file name. Without this command, the router is just going to boot from whichever image it finds first in the flash. So let's do show run one more time. See, no boot P server, no IP domain lookup without domain name. The forward protocol UDP that has been disabled. Disable HTTP and HTTPS services with deny locking. Our banner. And line console, line aux, and line VTY configuration. So just a quick test, we can do exit. Here you can see the service line command in action. So it tells you exactly which line you're on. And here's your banner lock-in with the password. So we set it as Cisco. And we have enable password set as well, which is Cisco. And we're back on the router. So that's it. I hope you find these commands useful. Thank you for watching LabMinutes.com, and I'll see you in the next video.